I'm grateful to the National Library of Medicine and especially to Jeffrey Resnick for reminding me about this fascinating film and inviting me here. Seeing the film now, with the personal and professional hindsight of many years, evokes layers of memory and reflection that I hope to share with you tonight. When my father joined the Navy in World War II, our lives changed, as they did for so many families. My mom and I moved back east to live with my grandmother so we would be nearer to where my father was stationed in Anacostia, Maryland, just down the road. After very active war bond and USO work earlier, my father was assigned to the Navy's photographic unit to make training films. I can remember him later joking about his magnum opus on how to assemble and disassemble a rifle. But he also talked seriously about what it meant to him to make films like the one we're highlighting this evening. His experience framed our whole family's experience with service people from then on. My mom and her girlfriends went out every week to the local VA hospital back in Los Angeles to dance with a particular group of anguished and withdrawn young men on the psychiatric ward, trying to use music and movement and human involvement to bring them back into contact with those who could help them. My first college was Swarthmore, near Philadelphia, which hosted a military rehabilitation center during World War II, where my father had spent some of his research time before making this film. From Swarthmore, my friends and I regularly went over to Fort Dix in New Jersey to play board games and cards with young men in the hospital there. So there's kind of a full circle feeling to my being here tonight to speak with you as my father's daughter and as a mental health professional. This film offers a platform for some thoughts about where we've been, where we are, and where we might go as we think about the needs of servicemen and women and their families. One question that's come up about this film concerns the underlying assumptions and the treatment methods it depicts. Are they still valid or effective? How much have we learned since then? What can we glean from the film that might be relevant now? My colleagues who work in the VA and those of us involved in other efforts for veterans and their families grapple all the time with many of the same issues raised in this film. We're still debating what to call these phenomena. Everyone knows what the descriptive picture is, with its characteristics of insomnia, irritability, rage, isolation, and physical complaints. But what is the utility of a diagnostic label, like war neurosis, or shell shock, or PTSD? These labels dignify it as an illness, but they also can generate stigma and a reluctance in veterans to seek help, lest they see themselves and be perceived by others as damaged, weak, defective, and useless to their services. A strength of this film is that it gives us a single sailor to focus on, reminding us perhaps that considering each person's individual story is at least as important as their diagnosis. I think what we're going to do now is pause to see some clips from the film, because our plan had been to show you some clips beforehand, before I talked, because I think some of you have had a chance to look at the link and see the film online, but others of you may not have had a chance to do that. And we do have about 7 minutes of clips from the film, some of them selected by Jeff Resnick and Mike Sappel from the library, with some input from me. And that'll give you just a taste of the film. So I'm going to pause while we look at the clips, and then I will resume.
Come in. This is Lucas, sir. Sit down, Lucas.
Thank you, sir.
Cigarette?
No, sir.
You know, Lucas, I've been wondering about you. During the week that you've been here, I've noticed that, unlike the other men, you don't talk in our group sessions.
What is it to talk about, sir?
Lots. You hear the other men getting quite a few things off their chests. You should be able to see that they feel better by so doing. What ship were you on, Lucas?
The Montandan, sir.
The Montandan was sunk, wasn't she?
Yes, sir. Last May, south of Mindanao in a high sea. Torpedo aft.
And you were a fireman?
Am, sir.
Certainly.
And it's a tough job being a fireman. Always below decks, you never see what goes on. That's why I'm fed up. Nobody gets it. Nobody.
Maybe not. And yet there may be some of us, even among those of us who haven't been there, who do understand.
What do you, sir, know about what it feels like to be a fireman? What does anybody know what it feels like to be a fireman except a fireman? You gotta be there to know. You gotta feel that goddamn heat. On the Montandan, it was always 128 degrees below decks. 128 degrees of sweat and more sweat. No place to go or to move to. Those guys topside have it soft. They can breathe air, move around, see the enemy. Hell, we don't know whether the next minute will bring a bomb or whether there's a torpedo coming for us right now.
What was your job in the engine room, Lucas?
I was striking for water tender. I watched the lines feeding water to the boilers. That's why I couldn't move. I had to stay with those goddamn valves. Guys topside and take it out in the enemy. They can shoot a gun. All I could do was wish I could twist a valve, but I couldn't because I'd wreck the boiler. Christ, you get so you gotta do something, and well, all you end up with is a burning feeling in your guts and your hands shaking. God damn it, look at me. This isn't me, Doctor.
How did you feel, Lucas, when you knew you were safe in the water?
How did I feel?
Yes.
I was damn glad to get out of that hole. Anybody would have been.
No, Lucas, not everybody would have been. That's something you've got to face. Furthermore, you didn't really find relief, did you?
I said I was glad to get out of that hole.
Perhaps for a while. But I doubt it for long. How about it, Lucas? How about it?
No, sir. I got the feeling I let my buddies down.
Hard to think what it's like in summer. Leaves in the trees and hot and thunderstorms. Remember when we used to come out here for weenie roast and all?
Yeah, I wonder what's happened to that old hay wagon, that old horse.
It was wonderful riding in that wagon. All of us singing. And there was always a moon, wasn't there?
Seems that way. Not as it was a long time ago.
Not so long. Back to senior year in high school. The time that we went swimming right over there. You proposed to me in the water. Silly place to ask a girl to marry you.
Well, I tried everywhere else. Thought you were stubborn.
We were too young and you knew it.
You never said that then.
No. Maybe I just knew it without realizing it.
I don't get you, Sue. It should have happened. Look what we've missed.
We'll have it, darling. It won't be very much longer. We can start all over again. Come back here with a gang. Have a weenie roast and go swimming.
How's Bert Haskins going to go swimming? How do you know how many of the old gang will be around, including me?
I'm sure you'll be here. I must be sure of that.
Oh, stop kidding yourself, Sue. Don't you know what this is all about? Don't you know we can't go back?
No, I don't. I know that we've got to feel the way we did about each other or our marriage won't work. You've got to get a hold of yourself, Bob. Ever since you've been home, you've been snapping at me and...
Oh, for God's sake, Sue, you just don't understand anymore. You've changed. Go on home, Sue. I want to be by myself. I never felt so low in my life as when I walked away from her. But there was nothing else I could do.
Lucas, tell the class again about that torpedoing.
Torpedoing?
Yes. How did you feel when you were in the water?
I've told you over and over again, for God's sake, I felt glad. Glad I was out of that ship.
Is that all?
Yes. Yes, yes.
I don't think so, or you wouldn't be so excited about it.
Well, it is. God damn it, it is. I tell you it is. Lots of them were dying all around me.
Easy now, Lucas. Please. We all understand. It takes a lot out of you to face bitter, unpleasant memories. Come inside with me. I'll be back in a moment. What you have just witnessed has changed him, started him toward a real understanding. He can now realize that all that disconnected, fed-up feeling, which showed itself as a fighting bad temper, comes from something underneath, from a feeling of guilt, a feeling of unworthiness, a feeling which he twisted about so that it looked as though everyone else were in the wrong. Everyone but Lucas himself. That's why we have these group discussions, to help you and Lucas see yourselves as others see you, and to see problems like yours that other men have. Furthermore, you and Lucas can now put your new knowledge to use in a variety of constructive ways. Occupational therapy will provide Lucas with a profitable physical outlet for his feelings. It will teach him that he can work while solving his problems and do a better job of both. And physical training will help keep him in shape in the meanwhile. What goes for Lucas goes for you. For your irritation is only a symptom of feelings which you buried or tried to deny. Like insomnia, or being depressed or sulky, or believing that you're no good. Bad temper is a sign of something deeper, something which has to be faced and understood and worked out. When you can do with your problems what Lucas has done with his, you will be free of all your symptoms.
It's sort of a hard act to follow. I think, as I had just said before we saw the clips, what this film does is give us the story of an individual. And thinking about his dilemma then gets generalized in the film. But his story and the story of each person who undergoes what our veterans undergo is tremendously important. And thinking about that highlights in vivid terms a culture-wide tendency to view emotional, psychological, mental troubles as weakness or failure, in contrast to medical issues that are perceived as no one's fault. General Omar Bradley's insistence on describing his soldiers' difficulties as combat fatigue might be seen as a way to avoid the stigma for his troops. The kindly, slightly aristocratic officer psychiatrist depicted in the film articulates what was surely considered state-of-the-art understanding and treatment then. Many of the things his character says feel accurate, but all too often to my ears, he undercuts his promising perceptions with cringe-worthy patronizing, or just not listening, culminating right after the scene we just saw in his short-circuiting Seaman Lucas's breakthrough by sedating him. Dr. Bush, the officer psychiatrist, repeatedly recurs to one explanation, that fear was not handled properly, when the ingredients for a different, more complex, and maybe more accurate story do seem available in the movie. There's an interesting intersection for me at this point. When I think of the force of wanting to know more, go further, find a solution to the problem, master the obstacle, understand better and more deeply. As I experienced that in myself, I realized that this was a lesson from my father. He didn't just accept this script and shoot this movie. He actually had himself admitted to military psychiatric facilities so he would know what it was like for himself and others. When my parents bought their first house after the war and their savings had all been spent on the down payment, my dad built the furniture. He decided to learn to ski when he was 45. Within 5 years, he was practicing with the U.S. Olympic ski team. When breakdancing flowered, he spent hours hanging out on street corners in Harlem, learning from the kids what they were experiencing and why it was important to them. What these reminiscences have in common is my father's capacity to meet challenges with problem solving and work. What my husband Jack and I, writing as developmental psychoanalysts about child rearing, have called emotional muscle. When people feel helpless and frustrated, it's hard for them to develop emotional muscle and resilience, and they will do anything, even resort to magical thinking, to stop feeling powerless and get a sense of control and effectiveness. Let's look at Seaman Lucas's story through that lens. He tells it well himself as he describes his sense of powerlessness and futility in his post monitoring valves in the engine room. Immured below, unable to see the enemy, uncertain of the value of his efforts, feeling less worthy than the guys manning the turret guns, he felt helpless. Helplessness is the sine qua non condition for experiencing trauma. Lucas longed to escape his dungeon. Then his wish came true, but in the worst possible way, at the terrible price of his buddies' deaths all around him in the water. Rather than continue to feel helpless in the face of such awful feelings, Lucas took an active stance as he began to think that his wish to escape and survive had caused their deaths. Violating personal moral values, as well as the military virtue of caring for one's fellows, feels unbearable. Burdened by terrible guilt, how could he let himself be happy? He set out to prove to everyone else that he was as bad outside as he felt inside. I find it interesting that all of my father's later films, the musicals that we all know and love, resolve their plot conflicts and the characters' problems through fantasy sequences. This may reflect my father's insight about the power of thoughts and feelings to make real changes for good or ill in people's lives. When we track this sailor through the course of his experience, we see that this central idea pervades the film. Seaman Lucas's troubled, though understandable, emotional logic actually interferes with all his functioning and his relationships. Instead of leading to resolution of the issues, as it does in the musicals, his terrible moral dilemma traps him in a persistent negative loop of guilt and despair. This brings us to another aspect of the film that I think remains instructive for us today. In the early 1980s, a colleague consulted me about a number of children in her practice who were all showing similar configurations of anxiety, phobias, difficulty sleeping, school problems, and withdrawal, alternating sometimes with out-of-control wild behavior. As we talked about the children and their families, some common factors emerged. All their fathers had served in Vietnam, several for multiple tours, and these vets had struggled on re-entry to civilian life. We heard about volatility, alcohol and drug misuse, physical violence, nightmares, irritability, suicide, and more in the grown-ups. It seems commonplace now to be able to characterize such difficult experiences in terms of sequelae of war, but it was new territory then to understand the father's troubles and their generational impact. A growing literature at that time was clarifying and validating. It told us that we were not alone in identifying the phenomena, nor in attributing the family fallout to issues arising from combat service. With these insights, we could begin to offer more effective and thoughtful interventions for multiple generations. In the film, there's a scene with his girlfriend Sue's little brothers, and it poignantly demonstrates the problematic interactions that can develop between returning adults and the children in their lives. I am impressed again here cinematically with the economy of depiction that indicates both sides of the potential problems. The kids are just being kids in the scene in the movie, throwing paper airplanes around. But Lucas startles excessively, then yells and blames the child. The children are bewildered and startled in turn. We can extrapolate such a pattern to chronic, repeated interactions that could lead to sad and ominous scenarios, such as mutual avoidance between parents and children, over harsh discipline, children's internalization of blame, and loss of an image of a parent to admire and emulate, among many others. I'm reminded of the children of the Vietnam vets I described earlier. One of the enduring strengths of this film, as I see it, is the inclusion of family and community in the picture. The idea that Seaman Lucas is not living in isolation, but affects and is affected by those around him. His return home on leave brings these issues alive, as we see him interacting with his parents and his fiancée, Sue. The film economically, again, gives us both the challenges confronting families and the predicament the serviceman feels. Lucas's parents and Sue, in their love and nostalgia, declare that everything can be the same again now that he's home. But he knows it can't be. He is forever changed by his experiences of war. We see their well-meaning but clumsy efforts to understand what he went through. In many ways, their efforts are no worse than the smoother attempts of the psychiatrist when he claims that there are some who do understand. To me, it seems disingenuous, perhaps even prideful, to think that we can really know what it was like. Creative and sensitive imagination can only take us close. Knowledge, empathy, and information can push us to expand the framework of our assumptions, to make different and better models to understand what happens. Rather than basing our ideas on what we wish could be true, thinking that ordinary expectations should apply in extraordinary circumstances like combat, we can use the reality to shape our understanding, which in turn determines how we respond to the real needs of combat vets. Although there are many literary and historical examples of aspects of that understanding, going back to the Iliad, for instance, those realities are becoming much better encompassed nowadays than in the model advanced in the film. The Army's Battle Mind program recognized what used to be seen as pathological symptoms as necessary adaptations to combat conditions. Hypervigilance, shallow sleep, hair trigger reactions. These are all important survival mechanisms in the context of threats to life. Psychoanalysts recognize that repeated experiences get internalized and become permanent structures in the personality over time. What is adaptive in conditions of extreme stress, such as combat, or in an abusive childhood, or in chronic pain, may not continue to be adaptive when conditions change, for instance, when a soldier or sailor comes home. When we ask a serviceman or servicewoman to adapt for too long or for too many deployments, we can predict that re-entry will be rocky. Things will not be the same as before. Internal resources have been depleted and cannot easily be retrieved simply by application of Mom's swell apple pie. Perhaps Bradley was right in identifying this deep, bone-weary, empty exhaustion. Another dimension is particularly well illustrated in the film. Despite the psychiatrist's emphasis on fear, Seaman Lucas and his fellow patients show us the predominance of guilt in their troubles. This brings us to the perennial and complex experience in war of what is now being termed moral injury by Navy and VA psychologists and clinicians. These are wounds to the soul, the effects of having done something that conflicts with the moral code the person was raised in, or from the feeling of guilt for having failed to do something, again violating their moral code. Wanting to live is natural, but it is also the opposite of the military creed in which you believe it is your duty to lay down your life for others. Freud talks about this in his memorandum on the electrical treatment of soldiers from World War I. He suggests that the conflict between the wish to preserve your own life and the wish to be a good soldier and save others before saving yourself produces a good deal of the so-called war neurosis. The symptoms include feelings of shame, guilt, or rage, just as we see in Seaman Lucas. He had lived when others around him had died, and he had partial recognition that he was glad he was living when others were dying. We could see him as suffering from the effects of a tortured conscience. He has to maintain his guilt to protect against ever feeling so helpless again. As long as he is guilty, he has some agency. This helps explain why my father's character goes on a campaign dedicated to prove that he is so awful that he has no right to live or attain happiness with his family or his fiancée or even at the local bar. We come back around to the experience of helplessness, as Lucas does not see any way out of his situation. We know from clinical experience that people kill themselves at times of desperation, when they feel they have no other options, cannot tolerate their powerlessness to change their situation, and turn to destructive action as a way out. Everyone is heartbroken by the current rate of suicide in returning service people. The human cost and collateral damage is enormous. Helplessness, rage, and guilt can bring the war home and devastate a family, a community, a whole society if they aren't understood and addressed. I quite like the character in the film of the corpsman orderly, who offers Lucas some pretty good advice when he suggests that Lucas is just fighting being afraid, denying the feeling, instead of doing something about his feeling. The opposite of feeling powerless is finding authentic alternative actions. Helping Seaman Lucas work actively to find meaning in his feelings is a beginning step. The orderly makes another useful point when he describes every crew member as fighting together. The whole ship is the unit. This reminds me of how movies are made. It's a team art form where every person is essential to the finished product. In the movie, the psychiatrist is the authority figure who has the answer and prescribes the medications. But the corpsman offers a different model of help through teamwork, what we clinically call a working alliance, the partnership that makes treatment effective. We can extrapolate from this point to the importance of peer and social support for veterans. The citizen services created from the draft meant that everyone in the society was involved and had a direct stake. Public support for military efforts in earlier wars didn't obviate all reentry problems, but did offer community welcome and ongoing respect. The scale of the mental health needs of our country can be daunting. It could make us feel overwhelmed and helpless. But we don't have to be. There is a lot of good work ahead for us all. Mental health parity puts all aspects of care on an equal footing, acknowledging also the interconnectedness of emotional and physical health. The integrated initiatives of the VA system that include a range of psychotherapeutic modalities, the research efforts of NIH and NIMH, the tradition of humanistic care derived from psychoanalysis, and the growing body of knowledge of early development that supports prevention. The efforts of many from the president on down to destigmatize psychological troubles and mental illness all offer hope that we can do ever better in taking care of our veterans and their families. I doubt if many people know that my father majored in economics in college and maintained a lifelong interest in history, especially American history. This evening represents a wonderful melding of histories for me. The personal history of my father's example in this quite special early film of his. the history of efforts to understand and deal with the aftermath of war. What we can retain from this window into therapeutic methods of 70 years ago that can help us not reinvent the wheel, but integrate what's useful with newly developed techniques of prevention and treatment. And lastly, the importance of supporting efforts to preserve our shared historical legacy as represented in the work of the National Library of Medicine and its dedicated staff. So thank you for having me.